what's up, everybody? I'm here with Dr. Layne Norton here on the morning of my first show ever, which is crazy to say. I told you this the other day that I came up when I was first getting into lifting, just relentlessly watching the old video logs on YouTube. And it was probably every day. I would watch one of them. It was either to learn or to get motivated or inspired in some way, whatever. So when I was coming into town to do this show, I was like, hey, shoot your shot, why not, and see if we could kind of recreate this just a little bit and have this kind of more, raw video style, I don't know. And I thought I've been reflecting a lot on what competing means to me, what bodybuilding means to me. And it's all well beyond anything competitive or athletic or anything like that. It's all about life and then learning about myself, learning about life, learning about just everything. And I thought that might be kind of interesting to touch on today, just from my perspective, and you being somebody who's obviously competed a lot and been in the game for a long time. Yeah, I mean, I think I got into lifting weights for the sake of, not really, virtuous reasons to have bigger muscles and be stronger and hopefully not get picked on so much in high school. But I think, lifting weights taught me a lot about life, whether it was bodybuilding or powerlifting. In either one, you're going to deal with delayed gratification. You're going to deal with setbacks, pain, physical and emotional. You're going to be very uncomfortable, and so I think having to deal with some of that stuff when I was young in kind of a controlled setting, because as I look back, I'm like, all right, my first show when I was 19, that was hard. But then I look at the hard stuff that came later that was way harder. But I always joke that it's like progressive overload for life. 100%. The more hard stuff you do, the more hard stuff you can do. Yes. Because you realize that what you thought was your threshold actually isn't your threshold, and you keep pushing further beyond that. Yep. And I think, doing bodybuilding helped me in academics. And we know that there's correlational and causational data for that as well. Not only does exercise tend to improve cognition, reduce symptoms of depression, anxiety, but I think just the lessons I learned from having to be consistent, show up every day, regardless of how I felt, continuously doing those things. And I also just saw that oh man, there's days, weeks, months where I feel like I'm making no progress. Yeah. But then when I look back after a year or two, I go, oh wow, I did make a lot of progress, right? Yeah. And so I think that gave me more confidence to do other things in life where it was such incremental improvements that maybe if I'd never had those experiences, I wouldn't be able to tolerate. I think that's one of the hardest things with having kids now is knowing I'm going to have to watch them struggle and not necessarily jump to intervene. Let them struggle a little
bit.
It's really hard. But yeah, I mean, I think bodybuilding taught me a lot. Powerlifting taught me a lot. And I was able to, use those things to compel myself to do other difficult things in academics, in business, and then in my personal life as well. And I'm still trying to implement those lessons today.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I would echo all those things. I think the progressive overload thing is something that I've thought about a lot before too, and it's wild just how much of a change it can. So I attempted a contest prep back in spring of 2020. Didn't quite work out because everything got canceled, right?
Yeah.
I was 5 weeks out.
It's a rough time to start contest prepping.
I was 5 weeks out when everything happened. So we got within range, but and this time, it's just been a vastly different experience. I mean,
What do you think made the difference for you?
I think it's a combination of a couple things. I think one is just having done it before and having that, learning some of the habits that help me be more successful.
Yeah, I think your first contest prep, at least for me as well, this is back in 2001, there really wasn't information online.
Yeah, I'm spoiled.
And you don't really know what to expect. But there's a difference between, I always joke, I'm it's one thing to be oh, that fire looks hot, versus being on fire.
Yes.
100%. You can conceptualize that would be really uncomfortable. Yeah. But when you're actually in the discomfort, that's when it's hard to kind of take yourself back out of it.
Yes.
So yeah, I think, having an idea what to expect is very helpful. I found that my contest preps for bodybuilding, even though I'd get leaner the longer I went doing it, and I would feel physically worse, I wasn't expecting it to feel good. you know?
Exactly. Yeah. It's not supposed to feel good, you know?
Right. Yeah.
That's what's been interesting here is I'm leaner than I was last time, thankfully, as you should be. But I still like, I feel better now on this whole, even, I mean, peak week is a little bit nicer. You get some extra food, but even the worst I have felt this whole time is probably how I felt 10 or 12 weeks out last time. Like, it's almost exponential how much different it is. And I think some of it's the experience. I think some of it's the habits. I think some of it is just being very busy. I had some people that were like, are you sure you want to do this during your PhD, like during your dissertation? And, oh, you want to do a case study with it too? Like, you're just doing all this stuff. And I think that's been a godsend, to be honest. Like, I don't have time to think about being hungry. You're just doing it. You know?
Absolutely agree. I think when you have so much time to think about how hungry you are, how tired you are, and you ruminate on it, it makes things way worse.
Yeah.
You know, whereas if you're just going, I kind of had a little bit like similar experience in that I was finishing my PhD when I started my first contest, or my first pro contest prep, first and only. And I found that like during the PhD, that was actually the easiest part of it, because it was like, all right, I'm going to lab, I'm packing my meals, I'm doing this, I'm doing essays,
so structured.
I'm doing analysis, and then I'm going home, I'm training, I'm going back home, doing some writing for my thesis, watching a little bit of TV, eating something, going to bed. You know, and I'm doing it all over again. And you don't have time to ruminate on that stuff. And actually, it's one of the things I tell people now, like more on a meta level. You know, mental health has been in decline in the westernized world for a long time now. But if you look at like any objective markers of quality of life, standard of living, violent crime rate, all those things, I mean, COVID kind of made things wonky, but up till COVID, everything was like, it was saying, the data said, we're living in the best time ever to be alive. So why were people well, 200-300 years ago, you didn't have time to hyperfixate on your problems. You were too worried about like not starving or not getting stabbed by that other group over there. You know, and so when you're like waking up and you have such a hard driving purpose to survive, and you know, you just don't have a lot of time to think about these things. I always one of the things I say is like, hey, somebody walked through that door right now with a gun. You're not worried about what you were worried about 5 minutes ago. Like, you're not stressed about that stuff anymore, 100%, right? 100%. And so what's interesting is like we see that even in pain science. Like if you have something that's painful, if you create a pain trigger somewhere else, it will actually reduce the pain that you're experiencing somewhere else. So all that to say, I think if you're going to do a contest prep, all that kind of stuff, don't necessarily like. Obviously, there are times where it's not appropriate, right? Like you got to be able to carve some time out for it. But I don't think just like putting your whole life on hold just so you can prep. I don't think that's a good idea either.
Yeah, I agree. There's never a perfect time, right? That's the cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason.
Exactly,
it's very true. And I think the other piece about this is really beyond the perseverance, beyond the progressive overload stuff we talked about, all of that. I think it's really unlocked some very personal growth for me that I'm super grateful for. My girlfriend's off camera, and I talked to her about this a lot recently, about how it's really forced me to start getting better at being present and slowing down, reflecting, being in the moment. It just, my mind's always going 100 miles an hour. I'm sure you relate, right? And being able to pause, clean the slate, and be present is very, very difficult for me. And I'm still not great at it by any means, but I am
almost 43 and I'm not great at it. So
well, it's a process, right? But we're slowly getting better. I think I'm seeing an amazing therapist. I've talked about that online before, that she's been super helpful and amazing. But then the prep really, it could make or break it, right? Like it can make it worse or it can make it better. And for me, it's really made it better. It's forced me to slow down and forced me to work on that thing and start developing that skill. And I got a long way to go, but man, it's been great. That's my favorite thing about this prep so far.
How old are you?
Right, 31. I had to think about it. That's how old I am.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, one of the things I tell people is you don't have to do it all right now. Like there are seasons of life, right? And I think so many people, they get caught in the comparison game, and social media makes that tough, where it's like, I got to be a great dad and a great partner, and I got to build a business, and I got to dude, and I got to take care of my health, and I got to do this, and it's like, I think over the course of your entire life, you should have balance, right? Mm-hmm. Between your personal life, your professional life, your relationships, all that kind of stuff. But I think if you're trying to do all that at once, you're going to feel very off kilter. Right. And I think life is kind of like, if you're walking a tightrope, as you walk the tightrope, you're going to kind of start going, and so you got to correct over here. Uh-huh. And so I tell people like, hey, I've said this to clients before who were trying to prep and it just wasn't going well and they had, couldn't commit the time to it. I'm like, hey, I'm not saying never. I'm just saying right now might not be the best time, right?
Yep.
Or like when I was doing my PhD, starting my online coaching business, and competing in bodybuilding, I didn't do a whole lot of socializing, there wasn't really a whole lot of time for that. And, when I became a dad and my kids were little and, my son has special needs, and I was still competing in powerlifting. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, I used to love to go fishing. I used to love doing competitive pistol shooting, all these. And I'm like, well, fantasy football, I had to peel back all those hobbies because I'm like, all right, if I want to continue doing powerlifting, something's got to go, you know? And so I know that like later in my life, I will get a chance to have those hobbies again and do those things I like doing. Yeah. But, I have to acknowledge that there's seasons of life. And I think when people can just not put the expectation they have to do it all at one time, it helps. And you have to prioritize and focus the stuff that you want to be important to you.
Yeah, 100%. That's been a very hard pill for me to swallow, is I want to do everything all at the same time. And
tell me about it.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Unfortunately, my relationship was something that was kind of taking a back seat for a while there, which is not what we want and not good, right? So I'm like I just said, I'm so grateful to this prep for forcing me to kind of come to my senses a little bit, and thankfully she's very patient and wonderful and helps me work through it. But yeah, it's amazing to me how such a simple, like you're lifting weights and you're eating less and you're moving around a little bit more, but it can just have such a profound impact on your life and who you are as a person. And if you're looking for those lessons, they're there, dude, and you can just run with it and develop,
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I said is, if all you got out of lifting weights was a good physique and stronger, then you missed what it was trying to teach you.
Yeah, that was formative for me, hearing that in those video logs,
Yeah, no, and I'm still learning. I mean, I've been through 2 divorces myself, and I was talking to somebody about this one time, and they basically were like, so Layne, you're telling me you might have struggled with personal relationships when you were an entrepreneur, did a PhD, world champion, they're like, it's that whole time thing, man. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, you're probably right,
Yep.
So I think like in this phase of my life, and I'm still, trying to learn and trying to grow, understanding, like I said, okay, if I want to do competitive powerlifting, if I'm going to do this entrepreneurship and be a dad, then I've got to acknowledge that maybe I'm just not doing as much social time as I used to, and I'm not, not doing some of those other hobbies that are less important to me. Yeah. And, it was hard at first, but I've been able to make peace with that because, like I said, once the kids graduate and go out and, I can go fishing every day if I want.
There you go. Yeah, it's perfect.
Plenty of time.
Yeah. And I'm so, and not just me, I'm sure there's tons of people who are very grateful that you've been so honest and transparent about those things, because they have to be talked. I mean, that's real life, right? And it has to be talked about for people to realize that that's going to happen and it's okay. And all you can do is just keep trying to get better and just it's just like bodybuilding, right? You just got to keep going. And eventually trust the process. Eventually you get there.
And I think, there's a continuum, right? And social media makes it tough because you've got people who it's like pseudo transparency, where it's like transparency for the sake of
virtue signaling. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I've probably been guilty of some of that myself. Then you got people who it's like everything's highly filtered, perfect. Yeah. They never have any problems with their life. And I think both of those can be like pretty damaging. And so I think there is a continuum with most things of, okay, acknowledging the stuff you struggle with without making it like all your content.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Sure.
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I do think that's helpful for people to understand, like I've talked to a lot of younger entrepreneurs, a lot of younger lifters, where I've been like, yeah, man, that's normal. Like, yeah, I struggle with the same thing. They're like, what?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, just because I have had some success doesn't mean that I got it all figured out, because I certainly don't,
Sure.
but I keep trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I think, when you have that growth mindset, which is something that I acquired from lifting weights, from that physical act, I think it enables you to continue to push forward and do uncomfortable things, even when, like I said, your natural inclination might not be to.
Sure, for sure. Yeah, I mean, man, it's I don't know. It just always blows my mind how much all this stuff is so interwoven and complements and amplifies each other. And that classic quote from Alberto about the best thing about prep is it uncovers things that you would have not discovered otherwise.
Yep.
So true. Everything. I mean, Ryan Doris coaches me, right? So like he's a gold mine of all these quotes and all these lessons and
Doris remembers all these quotes. I'm sure he's got a few of mine.
Oh, for sure. And it's just, if you seek out the people who talk about those things, if you allow yourself to be open to those things and be reflective and on the lookout for where those lessons can pop up and just because they can slip by without noticing, right? Like you see a lot of people who just compete purely just to compete, and that's fine, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but there is more depth that's there if you want to find it. And I'm like I said, I just am very grateful that there has been a whole generation of you guys that emphasize that, because that it just impacted me so strongly from the get-go, which was very important, I think, and I wouldn't be here without you guys. So I appreciate it.
Thanks for saying that. I'll leave with this one thing I said to somebody one time who was they were coming into natural bodybuilding. This probably 10, 15 years ago when I said this, and they said some pretty nasty stuff to me and about like competition or whatever. And I just said, hey, I hope that you do have success, because my guess is if you like get to a level where you're having success, you'll probably have to change your mindset to where you're not acting this way anymore. And that person actually reached out to me like 7 years later, had won their pro card, and were like, hey, I want to apologize to you. Nice. I was acting this way because I was insecure or XYZ.
Sure.
And you're right. Like after having gone through the rigors of all this, I have a very newfound respect for what you did. And that's like, I've just found overall, for the most part, competitors in the lifting community and bodybuilding and powerlifting, I've had very few bad experiences. Because I think there is kind of that like mutual respect of understanding that like we're all doing something really hard.
Yeah.
And so I think that for me, it's hard for me to like trash talk somebody who's done all that,
sure. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I think that's a great place to end it. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I look ridiculous in my show tan, but that's okay. We're making it happen. And this is awesome. I appreciate the time, appreciate the insight, and just sharing and just doing everything that you do. You're such a valuable member of the fitness community, not just in the bodybuilding world, but now in a larger scale, which is just amazing. So.
Well, thanks. If I've seen far, it's because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. Yep. So I've been fortunate enough to have really good mentors and people who lifted me up. So thank you.
Absolutely. All right.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
Good luck, Jake.
Thank you.